Greetings and welcome to the debut episode of our podcast series, Optimizing Pharmacovigilance Across Borders. I am Vesha and I represent COD Research. COD Research is a full-service technical contract research organization that offers end-to-end clinical trial and specialized pharmacovigilance solutions globally. As your facilitator today, I would like to introduce you to our speaker for this episode. So joining me is Dr. Jay Dave, Technical Director of Global Pharmacovigilance. And with over 16 years of experience in global pharmacovigilance and risk management, Dr. Dave will guide us through the topic of right-size PV system in today's discussion. So, Dr. Jay, before going in-depth into the podcast discussion, could you shed some light on what do you mean by optimization across borders?
Thank you, Anvisha, for having me on the podcast. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. Well, optimization means complying globally while maintaining country-specific sanctity. And what does that mean? That actually means that what is needed is not the harmonization, but optimization. This podcast, my simple effort is to make everyone understand the direction of optimum pharmacovigilance. I think that is much more needed. So the overall point here is creating or complying with the global regulations as per the local nuances.
That sounds good. But why do you think global optimization is an interesting topic to dive into?
So generally what happens, to understand any of the stance or, my position, it is very important to look back at history. Let me provide you a more detailed explanation on that aspect. So specifically, if you see, let's go back in 1950s. 1950s where COMS was first formed. And then at that time, the agenda was very clear, which was to create a worldwide guidance so that everybody could follow a specific guidance in the guidelines. Now, same millennium year, ICH was also formed. And overall intent at that time was also harmonization of science-related concepts. And the parties were obviously the, power parties like US, Europe, and Japan. They were the parties of ICH to form the basis of the guidelines. But if you see after 70 years, even more than that, what is happening is still today, all those countries are not having harmonized guidelines. Like some countries require a specific requirement while the others do not. So based on that, I would believe that, that is very important for us to understand.
So that is clarified. But now let us talk about current PV systems for both Europe and US regions. So do you think, are they harmonized?
Well, as I, just informed that they are still not completely harmonized. I would like to say that. Now, EU requires PSMF, while US doesn't. EU requires risk management plan for all the products, irrespective of risk is there or risk minimization measures are. And US requires REMS, but that REMS is only for specific products where element to assure safe use, which is obviously in colloquial language, we can definitely use the other word like risk minimization measures. EU also requires expected cases as well, which are all serious cases, while US doesn't. EU requires QPPV, US doesn't. EU requires PILs for all the products. US requires medication guide in lay terms, but only for the products where it is required, where the enhanced safety measures are required. Now, why US and EU are not harmonized? I mean, if you ask me that question, actually in my mind, since I'm thinking about the harmonization or optimization, because they are very much right. They are not harmonized because they are. They believe in creating laws, guidelines, or a regulation as per the optimum need of the country. This means available resources in the country, which are first analyzed, and then optimum requirements are laid down to create safety guidances. Also, there is local healthcare setting which plays a bigger role over here. So I do not think they are harmonized, but they are optimized.
Okay, so Dr. Jay, can you share your perspective on how harmonized these systems without affecting any regulatory aspects?
Well, it doesn't mean that, let me just contradict myself. It doesn't mean that harmonization cannot be achieved. On certain aspects, it's still there. For example, ICH has come up with the E2B R2 and now the R3 guidelines as well, which is getting implemented to a majority of the countries, which is for ICSMs. Then ICH E2C R2, that is PBRER format, obviously, which is accepted almost everywhere. US does accept, but US requires paired specific format. E to E, which was the actual base for developing risk management, PV planning, right? But these are the harmonized way. I mean, it doesn't mean that it can be implicated for all countries. See, everything is connected. Countries where medicine affordability is an issue, we cannot talk about pharmacovigilance regulations up to the regulated countries' guidance, right? So the overall point of harmonization is to create compliable gradual guidance. I mean, the term is very jargon way, but if you understand that, that means the countries can choose as per their resource availability on what could be achievable by industry. See, if you suddenly make PV guidance in non-regulated markets up to the level of most regulated countries, what will happen? First is industries will be burdened because they have to follow that. But the biggest burden would be on regulators. Now, whatever we submit as an industry, that would come to regulatory. So they would request some documents, but would not have even time for themselves to read it. And that's why it remains as a checklist. So whatever you submit, whatever is submitted, it becomes a formality for them. It doesn't help anything to regulators, industry, and the end user, which is patients. So for example, PSU are submitted during the pre-registration dossier to some countries. Now they are just formal piece of paper for them, because for them, if it is received, that is a check. So that's why the system, which has to be harmonized, at the same time, they have to also think about their own point of view, that's why I used to call it as an optimized way.
So do we have any solution in this regard?
Yes, the methods of global optimization that can definitely customize the required PV to fit perfectly. I mean, I like to call it as a right size PV system or an optimum pharmacovigilance. What is fitting to you may not fit to other, or there could be some sort of overlapping phase.
Okay, so moving on to our topic of current episode, what exactly is the right size PV system and why is it so important?
Right. So the first thing which I would like to talk about is right size PV system is to create a PV system and processes, especially, in other terms, you call it quality management system, in a way that caters to the regulatory needs of different countries as per their requirement. It sounds like I'm repeating, but let me just try to, make it more planned way. So rather than you overburden your entire, resources in terms of the full-fledged PV system, there is no point in putting, those extra burdens of, for example, let's talk about the activities of signal detection. So signal detection and management, at present also, it is not present in many of the less regulated. But it is also important to note that, example, US FDA. In US FDA guidance given for .80, it doesn't mention anything about signal detection. But if you go through the 2005 requirement, which is already placed in the signal detection or activities of US FDA, categorically mentions that it is one of the requirements, and inspectors are asking it. Now, they believe in their own regulators back signal processes more. For example, they also have US FDA have their own process to identify the signal, right? Let us take an example of PSMF. Indian PVMF, which is trimmed than European PVMF, and it is rightly so, because they do not require all the analyzers. And this is very much backed by the Indian PV regulation. So why to overburden QMS, especially for Indian PVMF, which doesn't require everything? Because if you create those annexes as per EU, you have to prepare it, you have to update it, you have to upkeep it. See, similarly into China, PSMF requirement came up in 2022. Obviously, countries are inspired by the available regulations in EU because that was the pioneer from PSMF point of view. Let's talk about. But it does not mean that the same requirement is there everywhere. So the onus especially is on pharmaceutical organization and PV service provider to create plug-and-play approach. So the solution which you were looking for is to create plug-and-play approach for an optimum system. Let me again give you one more example. I know this is getting lengthy. I'm sorry for that. But what happens generally is different examples would definitely put it in a context. So medicine, which is called Infliximab, which is Crohn's disease, and it is utilized for ulcerative colitis. Now, it has an RNP with additional risk minimization measures. They are like DHPCs and patient alert cards. And this is going on well in UK and EU for the risk of serious infection and sepsis. But the same Infliximab does not have any running REMS in US. No REMS at all. REMS is also for risk mitigation and risk minimization, right? Does that mean that USA does not care for that patient, right? No, not like that. So the aim of ARMM here, additional risk minimization here, is to educate stakeholders. So the FDA came up with a warning box on the US prescribing information. They also have a medication guide, which is one of the tools for risk mitigations. Now this has become a routine ways of minimizing risk in the US. But EU, as per their own standards, think that it is not possible. We have to go with the ARM because their healthcare setting doesn't permit. So it will definitely go ahead. Now the companies who are managing PV systems for Infliximab, especially for US, they can continue in the routine PV ways. However, EU companies, they have to track ARMM. They also have to do effectiveness evaluations of ARMM, especially additional. And again, here the right size PV system tailor-made the system, which is people, platform, and processes in a way so that optimum achievement happens with the utmost compliance. This is the best conceptual way which, I believe for multi-country PV systems. I know, people would say that if there is one regulation all over the world, doesn't it make it very easy to follow? My simple answer is no. Since every country is at different level of PV maturity, and hence we have to cater as per their nuances. There are certain harmonized way, you can go with it, which are not harmonized way, you have to create a nuance specific to that. Like slow metabolizer populations, drugs behave differently in the body. And similar way, less regulated countries need careful assessment of the PV system. So there is no point of bombarding them with the information overload. And obviously, as I said, it becomes checklist for them. So it is better to concentrate on what is most important.
Yeah, so examples that you stated were really, really helpful. But let us take an example of different scenario. Let's say I am a pharmaceutical company with fully developed PV system in US market, but now I'm expanding into Europe. Could you explain what is the right size PV system would look like in this case?
Well, the beauty of right size PV system is it answers question of different stages of product life cycle differently. Now, let me state in the same example. If a different right size PV system is created for EU, for example, when your product is, you are just getting into EU market, right? That means your product is not yet approved. You are creating a dossier for that. So when you create a dossier, what is most important is not full-fledged PV system, but it is RMP, risk management plan, PSMF summary, and EU QPPV details are new aspects of that, right? Which is very commonly a new aspects when it comes to the European Union. Now, people would also say that PSMF means entire PV system, and that's why you create a summary of it. Obviously, so you must be having a system, but you are not running the system. So resources are optimized accordingly. Also, there is one more thing, which is pre-authorization literature, which is going on especially for EU. So, what I'm saying that if you have a right size PV system, you can create entire PV plan based on the life cycle at which stage the product is. You can create a PV plan from submission of dossier before submission of dossiers to 3 months before approval, 90 days before approval to minus 30 days before launch, like post-marketing PV systems, and very important, post-withdrawal or cancellation of PV systems. So your processes should work around these scenarios. And that's why generally, when I talk about the right size PV system, what we do as COD is we try to create in such situations that 4 stages plan and try to leverage existing US PV system for the same client which we are talking about, which are basics. For example, ICSRs, for example, medical information, which are basic. I would like to utilize them and, have that systems ready as is, utilize them. I try to understand to design 3P systems where one more concept which comes in picture in EU, which is local QPPV. So at different stages of product life cycle, there are different local QPPVs are required at different countries. So I would still say it is best to create a stage-wise right size PV system that can definitely help pharmaceutical companies to optimize resources, or a PV service provider to optimize resources and utilize them where needed the most. If you work on this concept, rather than the generalized view of PV system that, hey, I want to go ahead, have everything entirely PV system, full-fledged PV system to be placed over.
So Dr. Jay, just to clarify the concept deeply, don't you think it reduces crucial information exchange to less regulated market?
Right. So this is, I think, the most important aspect because when you think about crucial information you exchange, that means the signals, the risk, the public health impact, right? Now, in that case, if this is the situation, so I would say, on the contrary, right size PV system allows to share crucial information only in less regulated or semi-regulated markets. The reason is very simple, because you provide crucial information without overwhelming them with all the data, all the documents, right? So they are not getting overwhelmed. That means they can only take the decisions which are important. Now, again, I'm a visual person, so I like to think about the example. So let me just take an example here. So country X, let's take, example of country X at present, only request ICSRs in their PV guideline, which is non-regulated market, for example, or semi-regulated market. And they ask to submit them only when you receive them from the domestic market, which is the same market. Now, they do not ask for PSUR, they do not ask for PBRER. But if you read all such countries' guidance, and I'm sure that everybody would agree on it, if you read all such countries' guidance, which are known as less regulated, they always talk about sharing emerging safety issues or emergency safety informations or safety issues which are impacting public health direct. So if you submit, let's say in the same country, if you've submitted PBRER, PSUR, signal reports, everything to them, probably they may not have even gone through those informations, and they do not have enough trained individuals also to go through the informations. So they already have a piled up information available. It doesn't change anything for them. On the contrary, this admin burden reduces their concentration on the most important or crucial information, right? Now, this burden is actually impacting patients because they are not reading what is important. For example, I would go further steps and contradict myself and say that global harmonization, which we were talking about the earlier aspects, that global harmonization is must needed only in such crucial information exchange about new ADRs which were identified. The COVID scenarios, like how the information has been exchanged around COVID everywhere. That is the crucial information which should be definitely go ahead. Let's say in UK, some serious ADR is identified with antihypertensive medicines, and MHRA wants you to update your label. Now, if you are convinced with this ADR, which is attributed to active ingredient, impacting your other approved countries, for example, India, don't you wish to share this information to the Indian authority as well, because you are creating CC as well? You should, right? So such a process should be welcomed as global harmonization. I'm always up for global harmonization in that context of sharing crucial information to different countries, be it resource intensive or resource scarcity plan.
So it has been really insightful hearing the patient perspective too in this episode. Dr. Jay, thank you for your valuable contributions. Do you have any final thoughts or additional points you would like to share before we wrap up?
Yes. So thank you so much, first of all, Anvesha, on the aspects of managing session. I would like to add that true pharmacovigilance is about preventing ADRs, not just collecting documents as a formality check. Especially when resources are limited, especially via communication, control, and care, this is important to achieve. Right?
So we hope this episode gave you some valuable insights into the first topic, right size PV systems. Thank you for tuning in. Join us next time as we dive into medical safety, covering aggregate reports, signal management, and risk management, all within the context of global optimization. Thank you all, and see you in the next episode.